Oh yeah. So I was working as a product manager, pretty much a solo product manager at the time. I was the only product manager. Well, I guess I had one other peer, but she was also like me. It came up from either an engineering or science degree and kind of ended up in product and really didn't have any kind of formal experience in product. Um, a handful of years of on the job experience. So I was looking to try and understand more about it, connect with other product folks. And there was this organization that still exists today called the Boston Product Managers Association. So I went to a couple of their meetings in 2007, and it was at Oracle, just outside of Boston. And it struck me as a well-intended organization, but I just felt like the people there were speaking a very different language from product that I was thinking about. And I also think I was the youngest person there. I was like, wow, everyone here is like over 50, and I'm like, 28 or 12, like a 30-year-old or something in the room. So uh, I started to look online for like different ways to connect with other product people, and I think Rich Mironov had just launched Product Camp in San Francisco. And so I reached out. I was like, "What is this thing? This seems great. Is this unconference? You can run it yourself." So I was trying to get as much information as I could, and I think he pointed me to a couple places. I to a couple resources, and I said, "Great. How do I run one here in Boston? Why not?" Um, Talked to a friend of mine who knew somebody at the Microsoft Nerd Center, which is their New England Research and Development facility, which just at the time they had a beautiful 10th and 11th floor that overlooked the Charles River that you could go and they would allow anyone to have it for free basically on off hours if you had a good excuse. So we got connected to them and said, hey, we're thinking about this thing called Product Camp. We need a space that can hold about 100 or so people. Does this work? They said, yep, no problem. And we put it together. And myself, a woman named Sasha Das, and Brooks Rutledge basically pulled it off. And it was great. We were blown away that like 95 people showed up. We were like, I don't know, is anyone even going to show up? And we were lucky that it did. So that was 2000, I think, early 2009. And so here it is many years later, and it's grown to be a really big product camp. I mean, there's like 600 or 800 people like attend that every year. It's pretty crazy that I mean, I'm not responsible for that level of growth, but it's pretty
Yeah, and
awesome.
if everyone ever in Boston by that time, I recommend it. That's where we met some years ago. I don't know if you remember
Yep,
that, but
do.
so you before we got cut off, you were talking about project managers, product managers. I have a two-sided question for you. So first of all, how would you define a product manager? And secondly, what's the difference for you between a product and a project manager?
Yeah. So how would you define a product manager? A product manager is, in my view, responsible for the product, whatever that product might be. So you're responsible for understanding who it serves, what pain points it solves for. You're responsible for understanding the technical side of it, and so that however you're delivering that product to market. So you're responsible to learn a lot of things about this product. I understand the argument of the CEO of the product or CEO of your product to a degree, and I understand why people say that. I understand why people say that's not true either. As a CEO, you typically have a certain level of authority, which you don't have as a product manager. You're really mostly leading by influence because I shouldn't say nobody reports to you, but rarely does everyone report to you, and you can make a more authoritarian or command and control type decision. You have to really be working by consensus and collaboration. Um, so a product manager is really ultimately trying to drive value to their customers and their business at the same time. And that's the thing, is you're really trying to bridge the gap between customer value and business value and bring them together. And your product should be the thing that does it. With a project manager, how is it different? A project is a concrete thing that you have to accomplish in some period of time. Every product manager needs to have project management skills, but that's not the 100% focus of their job. That's how I think about it. It's a skill set you as a product manager should have, um, but it's not necessarily 110% of your job. And it's a part, but
Hmm.
not completely.
You said there something there. You said usually as a product manager, you don't have everyone report to you, so you can have an authoritarian like view of the world. Do you think
Right.
you should have that as a product manager, given the chance?
No, no, I don't think so. So even now, I have a team of 6 reporting to me, and I don't want them to be. You want an empowered team, and Marty Kagan talks about this a lot. Um, you want to empower them to be able to make their own decisions. Your job is to lead them and guide them and provide the right framing, the right context, the right guardrails. Um, and at the same rate, depending on the size of your company and your position, if you are leading other product teams or other members of a product team, whether it be maybe design, data science, other product managers, etc., um, you want them to be bought in, right? And if they have to, well, just do what the boss says, I mean, I guess in some cultures that may work, but typically the intrinsic motivation is what really will drive somebody to do their best. So if you can find the right way to bring that out of your team and empower them to do their jobs, they're going to take a lot more ownership, and they're going to actually do a better job because they own it. Their ownership of that product or that part of the product is going to be there. So even if you are, like, let's say, at a higher level in product, I don't think taking an authoritarian approach is wise. Again, depends on the culture you're in. Certain cultures that may be more applicable than not. But I think sort of more the Western culture we're in,
Hmm.
not so much. Right? We want to give people autonomy as much as we can.
Right. Cool. So changing gears a little bit, there's a few topics I wanted to cover with you of different things that
Sure.
over the long career you already have, that you've not trying to date you though, but that
And
you've
I'm
worked on.
still young. The hair's not all gray yet.
Uh, so you obviously you wrote a book on design sprints, right?
Yeah.
And you're known for that. You've given talks on that. So design sprints, I don't know exactly when they started, like they coming out of Google Ventures. I believe that's where they started, right? So
I
where,
think they popularized the term. I don't know if it specifically came out of there, but I
oh,
mean,
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
would be really interesting to see, like, where's the real history of it. Because I was kind of doing them in Spain with my
Mm,
students as a adjunct faculty
mm-hmm,
and some clients, and that's kind of how I started them. And somebody from the UK, I think it may have been Adrian Howard, he was like, "Oh, you're doing a design sprint," and I was like, "Oh, what?" Because basically what I did is I took the Stanford design thinking framework, which I think got released in 2008, nine, something like that. It was initially as this boot camp, and then that slowly evolved over time, and it's gotten more nuanced and more mature over time.
mm-hmm,
But I took that. I said, "Great, they've got 5 stages. I've got." And I was teaching this module at IE Business School in Madrid that was a 1 week module in between
mm,
semesters, effectively. And so the MBA program director said, "Hey, we really need to incorporate design thinking into our program." This is like 2010, 2011. Um, he's like, "What can you do if we have this 1 week? Can you do something with this?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, let's see." I looked at the Stanford thing. I said, "Well, what if we did 1 day for each of these phases and kind of covered each one and tried to pull it together as a learning approach with the students?" And it seemed to work really well. And then I was doing some consulting with Explain, which is a visual thinking design agency based out of Portland, Oregon, and started to maybe infuse that and doing some of that work with some clients potentially as well, around a similar time frame. And so it was kind of this mix of my own learning about it and trying to pull it together, based on what I'd learned from some of the stuff either in my career or even through
mm-hmm,
Stanford. And then by the time I got to, I think it was just around, I'd met Richard Banfield somewhere in Boston, and he and I were out on a bike ride. And I just started a job at Constant Contact in their innovation center. They launched this new innovation lab, um, and we were on a bike ride. I had written maybe like 10,000 words because part of my role was to, how do I help evangelize design thinking in this organization through this innovation lab. I had sort of just put some spaghetti on the wall in like a Google Doc at the time, maybe around This is probably mid 2012, late 2012, I think. And he's we were on a bike ride. I was like, yeah, you know about design sprints. I know about design sprints, and he was doing them with his clients at Fresh Tilled Soil. He used some flavor of them. I was like, but Google has a handful of blog posts on it, but that's about it. Nobody's actually written a book on it. Maybe we should. And instead of looking at me and saying, well, that's a stupid idea, he said, huh, yeah, we should. So that's kind of how the concept of the book started. And we even reached out. I think Richard had a connection to one of the guys on the Google Ventures team at the time. Said, hey, we're thinking about writing this book. What do you think? Does it make sense? And we got a very vague response back. We thought, all right, okay. We had started to talk with a couple of publishers. We had brought Trace Wax on as well. He was a developer out of, at the time, Thoughtbot in New York City. So he was bringing sort of rounding us out as I had a sort of a product and design approach. Richard was more a pure designer, and Trace brought the developer angle to it. So the three of us sort of brought slightly different viewpoints to that book. We ended up signing a contract with O'Reilly, and then I don't know, 2 months after we signed the contract on that book with O'Reilly, Google announces their version of the book. We're like, oh. So we're like, well, we already signed a contract. We have to write this thing. Let's hope it's not the same book.
Yeah, I don't think it is at all. Now having been able to see both of them, I think they serve different purposes and they both have their own space.
We try to think of it like a cookbook.
Yeah,
Like, all right, here's the recipe for each. If you want to, each little spread can last as its own little how to. And if you want to look at the whole, the whole 5-course meal, great, you can see that. But if you want to just take thin slices, you can, and we try to string it all together. So they are very, very different, which is kind of nice.
but my question regarding design sprints originally is, do you think that they still make sense, first of all, and do they still make sense in the same shape and form that they did almost 10 years ago now?
I think yes, and like anything, it depends, right? What's the right context? And I think that's the thing you need to understand. I think I was obviously very in it many years ago, and it was like, you can do almost anything, and not almost anything. There was a time and a place for it, but you can solve a lot of problems with the design sprint. They're really good for upfront when you're kind of getting that fuzzy front end of a project going, or a initiative to understand, okay, we've got a hunch around this area. Let's kind of dig into it. And here's a way to accelerate some learning around that. Because really the thing that comes out of a design sprint is you learn a lot really fast. It's not like you actually have a robust design, because the official design part is like a day-ish. And even I've seen some people talk about more modern versions that are 3 to 4 days, as opposed to the more, 1 day for one phase approach that we wrote about. And that was the other thing, is one of the things that we were trying to differentiate with our approach was like, look, it's modular. You're gonna have people in different organizations that, and at Constant Contact, we're a 1,500 person organization, mature product's been around for a decade or more, almost 2 decades at that point. So that's very different than what Google Ventures is writing about, which is really startup. Like, hey, you're in a small startup. That's a very different look. And also your time and how you manage your time and how you're able to get resources in a large organization is very, very challenging. So, to answer your question, like, is it still valuable? Yes. But you have to understand the right time and approach. When do you have a problem that is, you need to learn more about? Do you know if that problem is worth solving? And do you have some inkling of what to do? And if so, then maybe you can go after it. It's really like a mix of 3 areas, right? You've got an element of design and coming up with some prototype, but you've also have some element of, sort of scientific method of like, let's uncover this. Let's do a little bit of research and get some customer feedback along the way. So it really does vary, but it definitely, in the right situation, it can be very, very helpful.
Cool. Now, with the whole situation we're facing, obviously, a lot of things have become more remote.
Yeah.
Do you I know you have some experience. We've talked about this before, but what's your experience with trying to run a remote design sprint? Do you think it is doable? Do you think you can reach the same sort of results?
Yeah. The thing is, you have to be in mind is you can't think about replicating it exactly. So, quote unquote, traditional design sprint, everyone gets in a room, everyone's in the same place. You're using a lot of analog artifacts, things on the wall. One of the benefits of putting stuff up on a big wall or whiteboard is as many screens as you have and as big as screens have gotten these days, it's really hard to step back and look at a wall that might be, a few meters wide and a few meters tall. It's full of organized post-it notes. It's really this a way to do structured thinking. And then you have that collaboration back and forth with people in the room. You can't replicate that online, but you can do a lot of things similar. Spending 8 hours online, or on Zoom or in Miro or in Mural, pick your favorite online app. They're not quite the same. So you've got to treat it, you got to break it out differently. You can still go through the phases, but take the advantage of the fact that, because we actually went through this with Fresh Tilled Soils, like, look, we had 1 or 2 team members that were remote, and the rest of them were in the office. And we learned really fast that if one person is remote, you have to treat it as if everybody is remote. And that was an early learning that I think really helped us figure out, like, okay, you can't do this the same way. So you have to break it apart. So a lot of it is breaking things down to more bite-sized chunks, also allowing the asynchronicity in that maybe when do you need to actually have everybody come together and work together on a board like a Miro or a Mural or something? And then can people do things independently? Well, they can do them on their own time, and you can schedule certain times where you come together to discuss what you've made. So that's how I've learned to take this. All right, we're going to come together an hour and a half on this day, and we're going to do these things. We're going to try to decide. Before you get there, do these things. And then between that and then the next session, which is maybe later on in the day, so in those 3 hours, I want you to do these couple of things, and then come back and we'll talk about it. So use the asynchronicity and the ability to do that, but don't try to replicate it exactly. You can still get a good outcome.
That makes sense. Before we move on from this topic, I have one last quick question, which is, how do you, like, as a contractor that's doing or consultant that's doing design sprints, how do you sell that to a client at 2 phases? So first, how do you sell them in order for them, okay, to agree to doing it? And then how do you get them, and more importantly, how do you get them to buy in to the design sprint, to even remotely be able to say, hey, go and do these things, so that we can then reconvene and have them do it?
Yeah, so that I learned a lot about this was at Fresh Tilled Soil. We were a design agency in the Boston area. They've now been acquired by another company, but they're still a pretty successful team. And a couple of times we had, oftentimes, what's the reason that somebody's reaching out to a design consultancy or a consulting agency? Why are they trying to do this? Is it they're trying to augment their resources? They're trying to solve a particular problem? If you understand that why, that can help you with figuring out how do you sort of sell it to them. And then I'll tell you a story maybe that can help by example, maybe answer your question. We had this one client come to us say, we need our new dashboard, redesign our dashboard. Our dashboard's not performing well. And we're like, okay, what's wrong with your dashboard? And we looked at it and we're like, okay, it's not perfect, but it's not that bad. It was okay. I mean, it did its job, we thought. But they were saying that their analytics didn't match up, and they wanted to see more people using it, and they couldn't understand why people weren't using it. We're like, did you talk to customers? We're like, well, we've talked to 1 or 2. So as we started to understand and unpack what was going on here, we started to realize that it wasn't the dashboard wasn't the problem. The problem was they weren't getting the uptick in adoption of the product overall. And it turns out that it was like, no, they didn't need a new dashboard. They thought they needed the particular solution. So they kind of came to us saying, you're a design agency, design me this. And we said, cool, why do you need this? And then it turned out that that wasn't the case. We said, well, why don't we do a design sprint? And then let's see what the right thing to do is. We did a design sprint. Turns out in the middle of the design sprint, we learned that, oh, they don't need a dashboard. They actually need a better sales deck and pitch deck, because the sales team and the onboarding team, they weren't framing the product right throughout the sales process. So the only person really doing it well, they're a smaller company, was the CEO. So the sales team wasn't necessarily able to set up the customer success and onboarding teams appropriately. So they needed a good pitch deck effectively that talked about what happened and when, and what would the process look like if they bought the product. And when they did that, that really changed them a lot, and they saw uptick. So they didn't need a new
Mm-hmm.
dashboard. They actually needed just a better process along the way. So in terms of helping it sell is like, well, what are you kind of digging into the why? Like, where are you here? Where are you trying to get to? And then asking why a few times to try and understand. Another example from my constant contact days, similar thing. Executive was super excited about a project, had a little bit of data, anecdotal and some actual analytics that said, hey, we see a lot more hits to our mobile, our pages, our support pages from a mobile device. We're seeing a trend. More and more people are looking at our support pages on a mobile device. They wanted to fund a particular mobile app around marketing and email support. For those who don't know, Constant Contact is an email provider like MailChimp, etc. Well, willing to spend, like, I saw the brief was like, I read the end of it as like, 12, I counted the number of people, like they want 12 people and they want to, invest $250,000 in this thing for the next how many months? I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Give me half this team and 10 grand, not even, 10 grand to go get some, gift cards to give some people, and let me do a design sprint. So we did a week's design sprint, didn't even spend 10 grand. Came back, we're like, yeah, you shouldn't do this product. This is the wrong thing to go build. So that became a thing for us at Fresh. So I would say, hey, rather than spending $200,000 with us, spend 15 to 20, 25 grand on a week's design sprint. And that would take, anywhere from a few days to a week to prepare, the week to actually sprint, and then maybe a few days to wrap up. And you get some answers real fast.
Yep.
On whether there's viability in going in a particular direction. So just like that person who came with the dashboard, like, okay, there wasn't viability in the dashboard, but here's another direction we can help you out in. So that's kind of how we sort of sold them from there on. It was a great way to start, hey, a lower cost way for us to validate what you need. And once we've done that, then we can engage in a longer process if something's worthwhile. We don't want to waste your money up front. Yeah. And that's actually helpful because customers are like, oh, wait, you mean you don't want my $200,000? I'm like, it's not that I don't. I just don't want to waste it. So it shows that you have the client's interest in mind.
That's pretty cool. It also ties up into the next topic I want to get into, which is road mapping. So it goes a little bit into how do companies plan? Like, how do you decide what to do? So that I was just gonna keep the question that open and let you take it from here.
Yeah, no, it's great. It sort of stemmed out of that too, because at Fresh Tilled Soil, we were talking with clients who had products and product managers, and we had I had a product background, although I was mostly there as more of a design strategist. We had another guy on the team, Evan Ryan, who was very focused on product and helping our customers with their products. And he was like, well, customers are struggling with like planning out. Like once we've engaged with them as Fresh Tilled Soil, how do we then set them up for success moving forward? And so we started to create roadmap workshops for them to leave them with some kind of roadmap after we've had some engagement with them. So we might start an engagement with a design sprint, do a project, and then we sort of leave them or hand them off with some kind of roadmap. Again, this is all collaboratively with them. In that process, we learned that customers really struggled with making a roadmap. And the biggest thing was that they thought roadmap equals release plan. And that was sort of, as we started to unpack this, people are trying to use this sort of product strategy roadmap, which is a strategic level, with a very tactical, date-driven, feature-driven type of thing. And like, they were just incongruent. And that kind of set us down the path of like, let's run some more workshops here. And that helped us learn more about how customers did stuff. We reflected on our own times with road mapping and our own experience, and started to evolve this approach. And then as Evan and I, we finished writing the design sprint book, and then I said to Evan, well, I got a publisher. Should we write a book about this? Who else has written a book about this? I think actually Evan asked the question, well, who's written about this? We've got to see who else has written stuff about this. And we started doing a search, and we're like, there's nobody. Nobody had actually codified a book specifically on roadmaps. And we're like, huh. And then the if not you, then who? If not now, then when? Starts running through our minds. So, we started down that path. And then Bruce McCarthy was a guy in the Boston area that I was like, I met from Product Camp. Speaking of how things connect together. And I was like, all right, well, Bruce has been speaking about this for decades, and we should bring him into this project because he brings a wealth of knowledge around this that I think neither Evan nor I really had. And so it was great the three of us, I think, really provided a good combination for that. But yeah, I'd probably say when it comes to roadmaps, the number one of the many things that people conflate is it's not a release plan, that they think they're the same thing and they're not. And that's where you can separate them. They're very important to be, coupled and related, but they're two different documents. They have different intentions. And a release plan should be much shorter focused and more feature driven, dates, et cetera. It's like a project plan, whereas your roadmap is much more strategic and longer looking. It could be 10 years out, it could be 5 years out, 3 years out. Depends on your business cycle or your or whatever
How
business.
how often do you then recommend you revisit that roadmap? Because if you're doing a roadmap as a startup, like I'm assuming you're not doing 10 years, but
No.
even if you know a little bit more of what your business and your market is, even if you plan 1 2 years ahead, that might change drastically because of
Yeah.
whatever. So how often do
And
you?
it does change. I think that's the thing is have to be okay with it changing. You just don't want it to be changing wildly. As you're an early stage startup, you almost don't even want to have a roadmap if you're really early stage, because you're just trying to figure out what's going to stick, what product features, what problems am I solving. So if anything, you want like an experiment map when you're really early stage of like, here are the experiments I need to run in the next few months to learn what's going to actually deliver value to my customer and my business. And then as you start to get traction, different story, then you can start to plan things out a little bit more, have that more the bigger vision, and start to track back like, all right, if this is my product vision, this is what we'd like to see the world look like in 5 years. Well, let's bring that back to, okay, what do we need to do over the next year, 18 months, 2 years to start to plan that out? And that's where also not having like specific features planned out for 2 years from now, because that feature may not even be worth it 2 years from now. So it's where you have like, what problems do we want to solve? So that's where the thematic approach of roadmaps is really helpful, because it gets you thinking less about a specific feature or solution and more about a problem that you can solve for a customer. And in solving that problem, you can then deliver value to both.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a workshop with Bruce once, Bruce McCarthy. You mentioned I did a road mapping workshop with him, and that was for me like an interesting part, or one of the most interesting parts was the theme concept and variable
Mhm.
scope. So
Yeah.
I think that, but I'll like your opinion on that on road mapping. If you don't have themes and if you don't have a variable scope in terms of the features within those themes, uh, they're not that useful, in my opinion.
Correct. Yeah. Don't bother. That's why if you're a really early stage startup, you really don't need a roadmap. You need more of like some kind of vision you want to aspire to for what the world will look like in the future, but then you need to learn. And so it's very different than, say, if you're a mature company, you've got a mature product, you've been around for a decade, you're successful. Yeah, what does the world look like 10 years from now? And how do you start to roadmap that out?
Mm.
I tend to frame it now like a theme is a mix of things. It's almost an equation, like problem plus user outcome plus business outcome plus some kind of solution idea, right? You kind of mix those things together. And that can be an example of a theme. So like, give an example of one that I cite a lot in my talks. Company called Watify. I think actually they actually have a site in Lisbon. I think they started in Mid Atlantic, but they've got
Mhm.
I think a dev team in Lisbon. They had this, like they wanted to see clients having less support inquiries. So that was sort of that was the impact of the user outcome they wanted to see. They want to see a business outcome of like decreasing their support costs and support time from their support staff. To kind of mash that up with like a possible solution was like, all right, how do we make invoices easier? So like the theme was improve invoicing options, sort of like a mix of those things. And all it needs to be is like a headline to give you a sense of what do we want to try to improve on and make better. And that's how that thematic approach can really
Yeah.
help. And what we do at Machine Metrics is we kind of try to do a mix of that, like, all right, this is the area, and then we also have what are we releasing in the next couple of months, and have at least some basic, next month or so of release plan. And we don't really, our release plan barely goes out more than 1 to 2 months. It's just not worth it because we're doing so many things that we've never done
Mhm.
before, and it's really hard to put a very specific time box around it. Um, when you're doing something you've done a million times before, yeah, it's a lot easier to say, oh yeah, this is going to take me X number of hours and days. But when you're doing stuff you've never done before, it's a lot harder to predict the actual time. So Don't try to. You're just going to lie to people,
Right.
right? Or disappoint them. So it's a tough place to be in.
What about both either machine metrics or some other companies or just in general your idea? Who should take part in the road mapping process? Because often you see like it's only that's why one of the reasons I was also asking about product managers. Is it only a product manager thing with maybe the C-level executives,
Mm.
or who should be part of it?
Yeah, it should be a lot, Barter. And again, like anything, the size of your company, it will
Hmm.
depend. Um, but I can give you the example of me, like what I do. So I have a sort of, I'm at the VP level. There's a few other VP of sales, marketing, customer success, and our CEO. Um, Obviously, prioritization, I need to work on mostly at that level. Um, but I still need to work with I have two PMs reporting to me. So I don't want to just drop them and be like, here, you have to go do this, right? They need input. They work with designers and developers. They need to get their input. So it's a lot of socialization. I mean, my
Hmm.
calendar is lots of meetings, talking with people, but a lot of those are trying to align and make sure that we have alignment on what we're going to work on and deliver, what problems we're going to solve. Um, so it really, product is a team sport for sure, hands down. And so is product road mapping. It's you as the product leader may be the one leading the charge, but you need input from everybody across the board. And the more buy-in you get. Now, you got to be careful that some people think that everyone has to have, completely agree to it. It's like, no, there can be that whole disagree and commit. Um, and if you have your, we advocate this thing that Bruce calls shuttle diplomacy, like doing one-on-ones with individual stakeholders so that when you get everyone together and saying, all right, I think I understand where everyone's at, but you're kind of bridging that last final 10%, like, all right, I know where everyone is. We're pretty much aligned here, but let's just come together and kind of get some final decisions made. Because again, it goes back to that comment earlier about authoritarianism, right? You don't really have that as a product person. So, inspiring everybody and bringing them along the ride, I think is a much more collaborative and better place to be. You get a higher performance in your team because everyone's bought in.
Cool. So before we run out of time, I want to get into a last topic, which is you got a new book cooking, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking. So one of the things over my last few years of really being more in the tech product world, um, and we started this with designers, but started seeing this of like, yeah, you don't need that dashboard, or no executive account content. We don't need this mobile app, um, and then we realized that there's a lot of people putting stuff out there that just doesn't need to be made. And it's like, well, why are we still building products that don't work or don't serve a need? What are we doing here? Haven't we learned this in terms of our ability to not develop products that customers truly need? And it comes down to there's a level of ego-driven development. Like a lot of people are just like, I think this, so let's go build it. And they convince a lot of people to either give them money and go build it. And what happens sometimes, those product features don't even get used. And I think there was an interesting study that cited something like, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like 30 to 40% of product features that are released never get used. And that's like, holy crap, that's a lot of product features that don't get used. That's a lot of money that's going down the drain. And you think about all of the, like, color.com, like that went nowhere and it was $41 million. Or what was speaking of like an IoT one, the Juicero, right, of Silicon Valley, right? This Juicero, right? $120 million,
It's
right?
crazy.
That product went nowhere, right? Did it really solve a need? No, it was very ego driven development. So, uh, and that says to me that those kind of failures suggest to me that while they maybe have some hypothesis or some gut feel or some direction or something that says that I think this is going to be a thing, they haven't done enough research to say, yes, this really is a thing, and you should build a product to solve that. Um, so I started to think about that a lot, and there's, you have user research, which can obviously do a lot for that. But you also have to frame that user research in the context of some kind of market. Does the market exist? Does it exist at all? Is it a whole new market, creating a new market? Are there substitutes that you can do that in? And there's obviously plenty of knowledge around how to do market research and plenty of techniques. And the third area is like your existing product analytics. What can analytics tell you about how people use your product right now, or how do they use a substitute product, etc. Now, you may not always have access to those kind of things, but those three things coming together, a good product person should know enough about user research. They should know enough about market research, and they should know enough about product analytics. And so the book is called Product Research Rules, and it boils down to 9 rules to think about as you are trying to do product research. And every product manager should be doing some form of product research along the way. And it's really mixing that qualitative, deep, gets to the why user research with the more quantitative things like market research and product analytics. And often it's a mix of all of those things together of how you can pull the data you have together. And one example is like, think about personas, right? We've all made personas in some way. Oftentimes they're done by going out and interviewing lots and lots of people and saying, here are the patterns we've seen. Here's the different archetypes we've seen amongst our people we've interviewed. Well, take that and then take a data science technique like cluster analysis. So if you take your product behavior, like say like, amplitude, mixed panel, Google, whatever your product analytics data is, take that and run this like a k-means or k-mode cluster analysis. And that tells you different patterns in the data mathematically. And then say, all right, let's see, I've done these qualitative research and interviews. I've got some patterns here. I've done some mathematical techniques to give me some patterns in my data, my quantitative data. What's the overlap here? How do I combine these two? Do I see similar patterns? Do I see similar things that tell me that this data can drive these personas? So that's where you can get data-driven personas. So that's kind of the approach. One example of using all the data you have, that's both qual and quant, and mixing them together so that you have a more robust, more holistic view. So it really isn't about how to be a better user researcher, how to be a better market researcher, but really how do you thread the needle between all those three things. So that's what we've been working on for a while. I'm working with R.S. Bilgen. He led the design team at Guarantee Bank, which is owned by BBVA. He led that design team for many, many years. He's a really good user researcher, designer, and he lives in Istanbul. It's been great. He's awesome. So yeah, we're just about ready to send the full first draft to the next step, which is called tech review. So yeah, we're excited. We should see it come out sometime this fall.
Is it being published by O'Reilly as well?
Yeah, my third one. They've been pretty good to me. It's been a nice relationship. They've kind of let me do mostly what I want, which is kind of nice. And I can even, with the roadmap book, we kind of said we're going to design it. We did the same thing with this book as well. And MC Michael Connors is actually helping us design it as well. So yeah, it's been fun.
Great. I had no idea it was with Aras. It's cool.
Did you know Aras? He's
yeah,
awesome.
he's been to MirrorConf as well. He was a speaker here in Braga some years ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's pretty nice. Pretty nice guy.
Yeah, he's great. Great.
See, Todd, I think we're running out of time, so I will let you say anything else. I don't know if I have anything else to share that we didn't cover.
I mean, God, there's so many things about product. I think if I have to offer any advice to any aspiring product person, is stay curious and be curious, ask lots of questions. And that's going to help you in so many ways. Like when you're really frustrated because some executive told you that you had to do something, and you don't really agree with it or like it, ask questions, right? And do it in a way that's not going to be like, well, screw you, why do I have to do this? But like, tell me more about what kind of value this is going to bring, how much money is it going to make. And if you can just start to ask lots of questions in a friendly manner, you'll be surprised at how far that will take you as a product person.
Cool. See, Todd, on that note, we'll wrap up. It was great having you here, and thanks for accepting.
To be here.
Okay. Goodbye. I'm gonna change this. Okay, everyone, this was another edition of Subvisual Live Talks, even with some technical difficulties. I hope you liked it, and if you did, Please follow us on any of these social networks. We'll be posting here for the next editions. So next week, we'll see you guys again. Same time, same place, and enjoy your weekend. Bye.